Hi. Um, this is an experimental video, I think. Something interesting happened to me a couple of hours ago. I guess maybe mundane in my case. But yeah, I saw an interesting story and I had this whole burst of creativity, and I transitioned this idea into a pitch for a story, which I then emailed to an editor, and the editor has actually just gotten back to me and told me he likes the idea, I should go ahead and do it. So I wanted to, in the process of doing all this ideation and idea building, I used a lot of AI tools, or a couple, and I wanted to use this video as an opportunity to sort of talk through what does it take, or what does it look like for a journalist to incorporate AI tools. In this context, I used ChatGPT and Perplexity AI. How do you use these tools in the workflow as a journalist? How do you take advantage of their power to move from idea to pitch, even through stories? I've worked with AI before on an entire story process, from the pitch to talking to the sources, to looking at data sets, to writing the final body, to liaising with the editor. I've used AI in that entire pipeline. But this is just a snapshot. I want this just to be a snapshot of what it can look like for you as a journalist to use AI to just work better as a journalist and to really take your creativity to another level. So let's get into it. So earlier this afternoon, I was scrolling with my phone. I'm using my phone to record, and I see this story on Nairobi Gossip Club. Big headline: Nakada announces ban on alcohol distribution in restaurants and in and liquor stores. Can't be more than 300 meters away from or less than 300 meters away from a school, and the drinking age has been raised from 18 to 21. If you're in Nairobi today, you've probably seen this story. Everyone is talking about it. So of course, I tried to digest the story. I'm like, oh, I start to think that this is quite a big story. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how big it is. My first instinct is to, okay, first I'm reading, of course, through the comments, on the Instagram post. But my next instinct is, let me go on Twitter or X. This is sort of where now the conversation is really blowing up. And I go on X and I can see the feedback, and I'm like, yeah, this is something that's going to occupy the Twitter news cycle for like the next maybe one or 2 days. So I'm like, this is a big story. I can see the feedback is negative, funny things here and there. I'm laughing. So it takes like 10-15 minutes for me to come to this realization that, wait, what's a good story here though? Like, what's the story? Like, so I'm thinking now for myself, okay, I'm a reporter. What story can I craft out of thin air from this? Okay, not out of thin air, but what narrative can I sort of craft from this headline that an editor would want to see? And so that's how I have the idea that, let me get my laptop. So I fire up my laptop, but first, before I get onto the computer, I think to myself, let me just do some quick thinking as I write as to what the story here can be. Of course, at this point, I don't have a story. Like, I don't know. I know, okay, yes, there's the story, there's the main headline about Nakada and the ban. And maybe when I check online, I can see that most of what other journalists have done, because by the time I see this story, it's maybe like 2 or 3 hours old. So by the time I look at it, what they've been able to do is that they are just sharing the details, just saying that this is what happened, this is what the ban entails, the X, Y, So those are the infographics you end up seeing on Instagram from Nation, from Citizen. So that's what has been done so far. But of course, the story continues to develop. So I'm like, beyond that, what's an interesting angle where I can really deliver value and tell like an interesting story? So I start to just use my notebook. I call it story ideating, and I'm like, okay, let me just write down what am I thinking about, what have I seen so far, and just have it on paper. And with the thinking that I'll then put these notes into ChatGPT to help me to start building. Remember, I'm not using ChatGPT to give me the story. No, I'm using ChatGPT. What happens is that when you put these things on ChatGPT, it's like putting them in a mirror. But this is a mirror that does some work on the notes, organizes them in a more coherent manner, and starts to sort of flesh out certain ideas that you might want to explore. But it's not giving me any work, any concrete answers. Like, this is not the story. So I start writing, and I'm like, okay, what's the trigger? The trigger for me is the Nakada alcohol ban. Restaurants, schools, age, all that. What has been written so far is the detailed report of the details of the amount, and yeah, any official reactions. So I'm like, okay, me, I like to write about geopolitics. I write about East African geopolitics. So I'm like, what is the geopolitical angle? How is this relevant from, for example, a Ugandan perspective? So like other players in the region outside of Kenya, when they're looking at this story, because one of the first things I did was, when I saw this story, I sent it to a WhatsApp group of some friends of mine from Uganda. And I'm like, guys, look at what's happening in Kenya. And the first friend of mine who responded, the thing he said was, this is the only thing that would get Ugandans to protest. Now, I'm not going to get into that, but I'm like, okay, you can already see that there would be interest in terms of when Ugandans see this story, they're going to be like, interesting. And then even the Kenyans, I'd seen on Twitter, someone had written a comment, I think like a quoted tweet, and it said, "Oh, so you guys have banned alcohol. How much is the fare to Uganda?" They wrote it in Swahili, but this is what they said. How much is the fare to Uganda? Because the assumption is that, okay, fine, maybe we go to Uganda and get cheaper booze. So I'm like, that could be an angle as well. So yeah, what's the perspective from a Ugandan, that aspect of Ugandan interests. Also, I had seen that earlier today, Museveni is in Kenya. But I don't paid attention. I just saw it. I saw there was like a whole, like something being televised on TV and speeches being given and Ruto speaking, Museveni speaking. So I'm asking myself, okay, if I'm trying to understand this from a Ugandan perspective, okay, our president is now here. So what's interesting about that? I don't yet know. I'm like, so maybe I need to interrogate, why is Museveni here? What's this state visit about? You get? And the reason I'm asking that question is maybe we can have an angle where we can sort of tickle the idea that it's an interesting coincidence that Museveni is in Kenya while such an interesting announcement is being made. But it might be a stretch, but again, what are we doing here? We're just outlining the ideas, just thinking, spitballing. So yeah, so I'm thinking, someone tweets about coming to Uganda. I have a friend in Nairobi who's going to Kampala later in the week. How can I use that? Like, I'm just keeping things in my head. Then I'm like, okay, is this a business opportunity for Ugandans to provide cheaper, safer, more easily accessible alcohol to Kenyans? Because now that's the angle I'm thinking. Like, okay, maybe if alcohol becomes more difficult to access and at higher price points in Nairobi or in Kenya, maybe Ugandans come in and fill that gap in one way or the other. Would that be legal or would it be bootlegged alcohol? What is the precedent of this? Because of course, now this would is call for me to try and research the data available on the internet about maybe movement of alcoholic goods across borders, across Kenya and Uganda, and maybe if there's any documented data from government offices about maybe bootleg alcohol that has been captured, things like that. So I'm asking about the data. What data can I use to sort of like tell a story around this whole movement of alcohol between Kenya and Uganda? I think about some headlines. What does this mean for... No. I was like, Museveni in Kenya as Museveni in Kenya as Museveni in Nairobi as Kenya announces alcohol ban. You see, like, that's a headline. You look at it and you're like, what's this story? So yeah, okay, so I have these ideas and I'm thinking, who can I pitch this story to? You get, who do I know at the Daily Monitor? Who do I know at Vision? Or you get, like, maybe I can talk to this friend of mine, and then if I call him and I tell him I need to talk to someone at the Monitor, he can put me in touch with an editor. Then that's how I get the story to them. or whatever. So I'm like, okay, this is, and I think, and I'm like, any other ideas, any other things, any other angles, whatever. I'm like, okay, this is what I have. It's what I can think about. Let me just dump this into an AI, and then we see what happens. So what happens next? I get my laptop. First I go to ChatGPT. I don't want to. I think it would be too cumbersome for me to constantly be like trying to show you, but like I'm on ChatGPT, and then I start a chat. So I use the voice mode. I really like the voice mode. It's so, oh man, this thing sounds like a person. Wow. Anyway, so I just open the voice mode. I'm like, hey, so I'm trying to come up with an idea for a story. So I'm trying to figure out where are some gaps that I'm not looking at for interesting angles in which you can tell this story about this alcohol ban in Kenya and how it can be. We can view it through a Ugandan, but maybe a East African perspective. So I dictate actually my notes. I'm like, so these are the ideas I have. I want you to listen to my ideas, and then just tell me what you think. Tell me some interesting angles. So yeah, so I do that. ChatGPT comes back and says, oh, this is interesting, a rich story with multiple angles. Here are a few ideas that stand out. So it gives me five core ideas. Again, it's not giving me the ideas, it's reading back to me my own ideas, but in a way that sounds cooler and like just sounds more, it sounds closer to like, maybe it just sounds like this weird corporate news speak. I don't know, but it just sounds good. So I'm like, I look at these ideas and I'm like, okay, cool, let me read through these and then I'll proceed from there. So when you look at these ideas, what are they saying? Regional impact. You could explore how the new alcohol regulations in Kenya might lead to increased cross-border movement in Uganda, especially with a hint that it could spark interest in protests or changes in consumer behavior. Number 2, political timing. With President Museveni in Nairobi during this announcement, you could dive into the significance of his visit and whether there's a strategic angle behind it. Number 3, public reaction. The fact that your friend suggested it might lead to protests in Uganda is definitely a strong angle. Of course, here you can see the AI misinterpreted what I said, because it's not that he said this could lead to protests. He said that this is the only thing that might people start protesting in Kenya, and it was like a joke. So a bit of misunderstanding there, but that's fine. You could gauge public sentiment and see if there's any grassroots movements in response. Then number 4, business opportunities. The potential for Ugandan businesses to step in and provide alternatives to Kenyans could be an interesting angle. You could explore the feasibility and legality of it. So yeah, then I look at this and I'm like, okay. So now I start to go deeper into each of these points, I'm like, for example, this story about this aspect about the possibility of an increased amount of maybe bootleg that comes from Uganda into Kenya. Why is there any publicly available data around that's like current? Now from here, I switch to Perplexity. So I tell Perplexity that first, the reason why I'm using Perplexity is very good at going onto the internet and like reading stories and like giving you an up-to-date position on something. I feel like it does a better job at that than ChatGPT. So like ChatGPT is better for the more creative side of things, but for like just getting a sense of where are things now on this particular matter and looking at academic papers, looking at current news articles, and yeah, Perplexity does that better. And it always I don't know if you can see this. It will always have a footnote for like it will always have a reference for every argument it makes. So at least you see where this argument comes from. The reason why I like that is because sometimes Perplexity will make a statement and be like, I got this statement from here. Then when you go and check where did it get it from, you find that source is saying something different. Now that's when you can tell them, okay, now here the thing has hallucinated. So this one I can disregard, or maybe I interrogate it further, see maybe is this true, or maybe there's a mistake somewhere. So at least it's easier. So with Perplexity, it's easier to spot the hallucination. That's what I like about it. Yeah. Now, so I come to Perplexity, and I'm like, okay, so I just want to get a better sense of where are things now. So I'm like, there's this breaking story in Kenya on the Alcohol and Narcotics Regulatory Body has announced a ban of several distribution methods for alcohol. I'm exploring how I could pitch this article to a newsroom in Uganda. Here's a story on the details. Here is a story on the details that you can start with. So I add here a link for a story that was written by the East African. So again, what I was saying earlier, what journalists have done so far with this story, as at the time of recording this, is they just explain the details of the announcement of like this is what has been said. You get. Yeah. So I'm like, I have a story. Take a look at this story to get up to date on all the details. I have a couple of story angles I'm looking to explore with this. Could this lead to a spike in travel between Kenya and Uganda? Could Ugandans fill a gap for Kenyans by providing more easily accessible, cheaper and safe alcohol? Also, I noticed Museveni is in Nairobi for the state visit. What is that about? Look up. So this is where I need Perplexity to help me. I'm like, what is that about? In brackets, look up the reporting on this. And is there an angle in which we can take the idea of the visit and such an announcement occurring? I'm not sure that. I think I made a mistake. Yeah, piece all this stuff together. So Perplexity is like, yeah, cool. Looks at the current stories, gives me the current breakdown, the story background, Kenya's alcohol breakdown. So it summarizes it for me is that NACADA has launched this policy. The policy was signed into law, or rather, it was approved by cabinet a month ago in July, and then it's being launched today. The details are here. Precedent and data. This is what I wanted to find. Cross-border alcohol movement. Uganda leads East Africa in alcohol consumption. Ugandans consume much more alcohol per capita, which is 9.5 to 11 liters per year, than Kenyans, which is 3.5 to 4.5 liters per year. And then it puts here the sources, which is a paper by Cass and some other statistics. So it's giving me the statistics. You see, all the statistics, I'm now putting them into my brain. I'm like, we can get an angle there. Maybe we can turn that into a visualization. Again, the AI is not working for me. The AI is just helping me to push my brain to the next level. You get? If I'm not using AI, I could have still come to this conclusion, but first I'd have to now go through tons of sources on the internet, find which one is worthwhile, then read the whole paper, 18 pages, then find the table, then I'm like, then now try to put the table in another form where I can understand it better. But now here it's a bit faster. So, and then it suggests news angles for your article. Will Kenyan crackdown spark a border booze boom? Uganda and Kenya state politics. Is there a diplomatic angle? Policy lessons and cultural contrasts. Structures of your pitch and article. Here are some possible headlines, interview, reporting angles, people you can speak to, key questions to explore. Yeah. So it has given me all this to think about, all this to churn through, sort of like deduce what am I thinking. So next I ask about is the policy in effect now? It gives me a breakdown to explain what that means, how even though they've made the announcement now and it is in effect legally, of course there has to be some time for it to actually be implemented in reality. So eventually, as I'm consuming all this information, now a story is starting to take root in my head, and I'm like, okay. I've seen what might be newsworthy. You get the decision of what is news. You see now, for example, the decision of what is newsworthy. I'm the one making that decision. You get the AI doesn't make that decision. It's me. So I look at it and I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah, so it says, if you want, I can help you frame these quotations into a narrative for your article pitch or further analysis. So I'm like, I tell it, okay, yes, please do that. The story essentially follows something along the lines of, so this is now the story I'm thinking. What does a call for regional cooperation in the policy? There's a step I missed here. So the news stories on the internet they are all sort of like from a press release, I think, or they are like, yeah, they're more or less from a press release, and these reporters were actually at the event. But alongside this announcement, of course, there's a whole national policy document that explains the thinking behind this policy, how it is going to be implemented, and things like that. A very comprehensive government document. So I'm like, where is that policy? I go to the NACADA website, they've already posted it. So I'm like, now in this policy, would it be possible for me to find any information that would feed this narrative I'm trying to think about, this whole, looking at the whole legislation from a regional perspective? So I ask Perplexity that. I upload the report, not the policy, and I'm like, read this policy and tell me what is, are there any linkages with what we've been thinking about previously? It tells me that the full Kenya national policy, the prevention, management, and control of alcohol, drugs, and substance abuse, does not explicitly mention Uganda or cross-border issues with Uganda. The document is focused on Kenya's internal framework, prevention, supply and demand, reduction, regulation, However, the policy does, one, it emphasizes regional cooperation with this African community. Two, highlights, so it goes on about that, highlight the importance of border control and combating illicit trafficking of alcohol and drugs, you see. Call for enhanced collaboration and information exchange with regional and international bodies, you see. Stress the role of the ministry responsible for East Africa Community Affairs in strengthening regional partnerships and coordination regarding substance abuse control. You see now, from here I'm like, okay, so the policy actually does state that we need to work with our neighbor countries to make this happen. What's that going to look like? You get, when in reality, there is a thriving bootleg business that's moving across East African borders. You get? So I'm like, okay, cool. So, what happens next? So I am like, okay, fine. The idea I'm thinking about is, I deduce the story into what I think is newsworthy is that, what does a call for regional cooperation in the policy mean in terms of the demons that would need to be confronted, in brackets referencing the well-documented history of bootleg business across borders and scenarios in which this surge happens. And I'm like, yeah, turn that into a deeper sort of like brief, like a story brief, like an in-depth story brief. It writes out the brief, I copy that brief, I put it in ChatGPT, and I'm like, now take a look at this brief that I've worked on for this story, turn this into a pitch that I can send to an editor. ChatGPT does it. I review the pitch, and I'm like, okay, this is good, cool, just make it sound like an email. Very punchy, very straight to the point, just get straight to what I'm thinking about, and how I want to pursue this story, and yeah, if the publication would be interested in commissioning such a story. Yeah, so I once it writes for me the email, I put the email in I put the email in Gmail, I read the email, I make edits, I cut a few things out, just make it nice and polite. I hit send. Yeah, 10 minutes later, the editor emails me, it's like, yo, go ahead with this. This is good. Even give me a few ideas to beef it up. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now I start writing the story. Now I start looking for the data. Now I put the data, and all through that I'll be using AI. I'll put that, I can use, I can, for example, if I find maybe from the policy or any other documents, any other reports, maybe from URA or KRA on maybe the bootleg business, I can get those, put them into this chatbot. It extracts them, put the data in a table. I put that table in Flourish. I get some visualizations. I write the story. I speak to sources. Now you see there are things like speaking to sources, writing the story, like putting the things together. There is no way that ChatGPT can do that. There is no prompt that you can put in and to do that, and the prompt now knows that I can call this boy of mine, and then that boy connects me to this guy, then I can find a source in this organization. I talk to them and I'm like, I'm a reporter and I need a quote on this. ChatGPT is not going to do that. You get? It's me who's going to do that. I'm just using it to to quickly put this together. Mind you, this was a process that took me like what? like 45 minutes. You get? And in that time, I went from having no story idea at all to a fully fleshed out pitch with like I have the whole structure of the story down. It's just a matter of like speaking to a few sources, getting a few data sources to fill up these gaps, and it's a complete story. And that's how I use AI as a journalist in my workflow. I hope this video has been beneficial. I've been rambling. I feel like I've been... But yeah, bye.